All right, so now that we sort out all the technical problems, so my name is Ermias Kebreab. I'm a professor at the University of California, Davis, and thank you very much for the invitation. This worked out really well. So I'm here in Scotland for a TED Talk. I'm giving a TED Talk on Thursday on climate-related kind of stuff. So it really worked out, and I had a really wonderful day today. Visiting two farms, and I was quite impressed with the way things are working here. I was able to see some things in action. So I'll share my thoughts on what can be done, and how we can look at the whole carbon budget, and how we should be looking at the carbon budget on the farm. So today, what I want to talk about is looking at livestock and climate change, and see if seaweed could be part of the solution. Let's see. Oh. Okay. All right. So I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's a reason why we want to eat animals for food, right? I see in a lot of places there's a push to the veganism and vegetarian stuff, which is fine. People have the issues with things like lactose intolerance and things like that, and that's fine. But as long as people have the right information, then that's okay. So if you're trying to reduce the impact of climate by changing diet, the change you're going to make is very, very small. As most of the, as I'll show you later on, most of the emissions actually from energy sector. So that's where we can really make a lot of headway. But one of the main reasons is that we need micronutrients in certain amounts and for different age groups, and because of those micronutrients, animal source foods are dense in those micronutrients. And not just the amount, but also they are easily absorbable as well. So if you're gonna have some of those micronutrients in plant-based, you're gonna have to eat a lot of plants to be able to do that. And when you're eating more of that, then you're also consuming more calories. So it doesn't work out quite well. So the way we need to compare is that how much nutrients are you getting? What's the nutrient density that you're getting compared to how much calorie and protein that you're getting. So if you just compare calorie basis, you're going to get the wrong impression. Or if you look at the protein basis also, you're not going to get the full picture. To get the full picture, you look at all the nutrients that you're getting from whatever portion of animal source food you're consuming. Just a couple of graphs to show the relationship. In this graph here, you'll see that on the x-axis is different countries around the world, and then on the y-axis you have on one side is the level of stunting in children up to 5 years old. So the dots are basically the level of stunting happening, and then on the other y-axis you will see that the annual meat consumption, and there is a strong correlation between the amount of people consuming meat or children consuming meat and the level of stunting as well. So it's very, very clear that consuming animal source foods would help in reducing stunting quite a bit, because basically you're providing the nutrients. And even beyond this, there's been a lot of experiments that has been shown that the attention and the mind development is really much enhanced when children are fed animal source foods. And so it's really important to add in our diet. And that's not just only in low-income countries, but even in high-income countries. This is from the US, where there is a micronutrient deficiency among non-pregnant women here. About 30% of non-pregnant women have the deficiency, at least one micromineral. Most of them is because of iron deficiency, but there are also vitamin D and folate and vitamin B12 as well. So this is quite common. I heard one talking from England actually, where adolescent girls are now were turning vegetarian, and because of their need for high iron, they're not getting enough iron, and they're getting diseases that malnutrition that was eradicated like 100 years ago. That actually coming back now because they're not consuming the right amount of micronutrients. So that's, you know, it's a bit of a worry when that kind of thing happening. Okay, so going back to what I want to talk about is looking at the environmental impact of livestock. So yes, livestock would give you high nutrients, and the nutrient density is great, but there is also another aspect where the environmental impact. So in this graph, you'll see that most of it is energy, so about 73% or so is energy. But for agriculture, particularly for livestock, it's about 5.8%, about 6% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from livestock, and then the rest is from agricultural soils and rice and things like that. So there is an impact, and so the question is, you know, what can we do about that impact? Can we reduce this emissions? And why are we interested in doing that? There are two scenarios here. So the first scenario is if you just do not do anything, keep the way it is, and so the carbon emissions basically become more or less stable as well. And but over a long period of time, sort of the effect it has on the warming. So that the last, I don't know if I can show my arrow. On the bottom panel on A, it shows the warming, what kind of effect it has on the warming of the globe, and you can see that it's going a little bit going up over the years. On the second panel is if you then start reducing those emissions, the impact is that you will actually go into a negative emissions, which means that you're drawing more carbon than you're putting out there. So there's actually a slowing down of global warming. And the last panel on B shows you that, you know, as you decline emissions, the global warming potential declines as well. And so methane is special because it's a short-lived climate pollutant. Carbon dioxide lives in the atmosphere for thousands of years, while methane only lives in the atmosphere for 10 years, 10, 12 years. And then it decays and becomes carbon dioxide and comes back, and then it will be picked up by the grass. So the cycle is it's a full cycle there. So because of that, if we start reducing methane now, in the next 10 years, we will see that effect. So the effect is right away. For carbon dioxide, if we stop doing it now, the warming is still going to continue. And so the effect will be felt later on, but at least it doesn't get any warmer. So that's why we need to stop carbon dioxide quickly. But if you do it with methane, we are actually reverse that trend, at least in the short term, and we're actually going to pull some carbon from the atmosphere. So that's why there is a push now. I just saw before I came here a new agreement with 30 different companies, and the federal government, US and the European Union, all agreeing to reduce emissions. Methane emissions, and they putting $200 million to invest in efforts to reduce emissions as well. So we are actually writing a proposal to the White House to try to get some of that money for agriculture-related kind of work. So I think it's all coming together. We just need to make a push and make a case that we can actually reduce from livestock, and there are different ways of reducing livestock. And one of the reasons that a lot of things has happened is because of legislation we have in California, where the legislation basically wanted to reduce emissions, methane emissions in particular, by 40% by 2030. So in the next 9 years, we have to reduce by 40%. The federal government just came out today was 30% by 2030. But California has already been on the books for some time now to reduce it by 40%. And if things are doing well, even they're considering to bump it up to 60% as well. So this actually really helped in focusing on methane. And we started doing a lot of work on feed additives, and we actually have a lot more work than we can handle right now because there's a lot of interest in this, and it basically spurred innovation, and people who have been like thinking about this kind of thing now they have extra motivation because if farmers do not reduce emissions as in this bill, then there's going to be penalty, and so they're trying to come up with solutions so that farmers can actually reduce those emissions and meet this obligation. And this is happening all over the world. And I think Denmark very recently came up. I can't remember exactly, but it was more than California. I think like 50–60% reduction is what they are expecting. It's just only going to grow from this. And I'm sure in the COP26 meeting, it's going to happen in Glasgow, methane is going to be at the forefront. So I will not be surprised if more and more nations came up with legislation to reduce methane emissions by a certain amount. So watch out for those kind of things happening in Glasgow in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So going back to to methane, as I said, there is a carbon cycle happening where animals are consuming grass that fix the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And when the animals come in, and some of the carbon is released as carbon dioxide, some of it is converted into tissue and muscle and milk and things like that, animal products, and then some of it is temporarily converted into methane. So that methane will be in the atmosphere for 10 to 12 years. It breaks down, it reacts with hydroxyl radicals in the atmosphere, it breaks down into carbon dioxide and water, and then the cycle continues. So that carbon in the methane is in the methane forms is for about a decade. But then when it is in the methane form, it is much more effective in trapping heat. So compared to carbon dioxide, methane, it depends on the time horizon you look at, but it could be up to 80 times more polluting or heat trapping ability than carbon dioxide. So that's why we wanted to take as much methane off as possible from the atmosphere. So there are different ways of doing this. There's a lot of research that's been done. We are going to publish one with an international committee that put together by United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And we've identified about 30 different types of mitigation options that people have looked at. Some of them work well, some of them not so much, but I just want to do a couple of those, share with you, and then compare with what mitigation we can do with seaweed as well. So far we've done a lot of work in terms of changing the diets of the animals and then playing with the level of concentrates, basically working on nutrition, genetics, and management. That's been the main tool. And so this was a life cycle assessment done in California. And basically, we look at the whole system. So instead of looking at just part of the system, this is for dairy cattle. So you could do this for beef cattle as well. So it's the same thing. And on the y-axis is basically the greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram of milk. You can do this for a kilogram of beef as well. And so per kilogram of milk, we have the emissions. We are comparing the emissions in 1964 to 2014. So over 50 years, what has happened? And we identified the main sources of emissions are basically feed production, so growing feed to feed the animals, and then farm management, so basically using electricity on the farm for milking, for cleaning and cooling and all that kind of stuff. And then enteric methane is the biggest one, and then manure management. So the manure management here it looks quite high compared to others. That's because in California, we use the lagoons to collect and store manure. and because it's hot and it's warm throughout the year, that's really nice condition for the microbes. So we have a lot of methane coming up. If you do it here, it would be a completely different scenario, because colder temperature, and you don't really use a lot of lagoons here as well, which means that that part will go down quite a bit. So looking at this, you can see that we have reduced our emissions quite a bit in the last 50 years. It's about 45% reduction in the carbon footprint, and that is mostly because of enteric methane, and that is because we improved the yield, the amount of milk that an animal is producing. Maybe about 20 kilograms or something like that in the 1950s or 60s, and now 40 kilograms is probably the average. So 35-40 kilograms is the average in California. And every year we see that there's about 2% increases in milk production. So in the next 5 years, 50 kilogram cow would be just average cow. So when you do that per kilogram of milk, then you're reducing the emissions as well. You've reduced water footprint by 8%. And that is mostly because of improved feed crop production. So the crop production has really improved. The yield has improved quite a bit. So you don't need as much water and as much input for the yield that we're getting with these new varieties. And then some efficiencies as well in terms of transporting water, using better irrigation systems, and all that will really help reduce that. And land footprint also reduced by 89%. So that's really because of, again, efficiency in growing crops. We don't need to use as much land as we did 50 years ago. So basically, the advantage in California is also we use a lot of material that can be recycled. But almost about 50% of the material given to the animals is byproduct. Particularly, we have almond hulls. So that's almond. The only state in the U.S. that produces almonds is California, and then what's left over, the almond hulls, is now shipped to dairies. If you go to any dairy in California, you will see mountains of almond hulls. And like 10, 15 years ago, that used to be sent to a landfill and then buried and then converted into methane and released outside. But now the animals are actually consuming it. So that really helps. Then you don't have additional water or land, for the byproducts, because it's already, you already took out the main ingredient. And that is also can be done here in Orkney as well. I don't know if you've seen this. This was published 35 years ago. They're talking about the sheep in Orkney and how sort of feeding seaweed they would grow normally. There's no issue there, and they're trying to understand why that is, and trying to look at the microbiology. The microbes in the gut are different when you compare it to those who are fed seaweed with pasture fed. They have different profiles. They developed a way to utilize those seaweeds. So it didn't really affect them in terms of health or other things. In fact, if you take them off the seaweed and pasture, you may have some issues there. And that would be, if I was going to do an LCA for this sheep, for example, it would be zero for crop production, right? So there's no crop-related emissions. There's not going to be much on the farm emissions as well. There's not going to be anything or very little on the manure side as well. So it's only the enteric bits that's left. And then if you give them a slightly different type of seaweed, you get rid of that enteric as well. So, all of a sudden you are into a zero emission scenario. So it would be really interesting to do a life cycle assessment for that kind of system. So the other one, I guess the main one that brought me here to Scotland in the first place is using this one specific seaweed and livestock. And the way it started was actually in Canada. There's in Prince Edward Island, there's a farmer was noticing that when his cows, the cows that are feeding on, just foraging on seaweed, just by the coast, they look better, they were doing better. And so he contacted some of the scientists around there and told them, like, it must be something on the seaweed that they are doing well. Oh, can I come closer? Okay, I'll shout. I'll use my lecturer's voice. All right, so what happened was that this farmer contacted people and asked, can you look into this? And one of the scientists then decided to screen different type of seaweeds. And at that time, he got a job in Australia, so he went to Australia, and then he collected a lot of seaweed from the southern coast of Australia, and they got a lot of different type of seaweed. And he tried them on, and one of them, Asparagus taxiformis, when they did it in the lab at about 2%. So you can see here, unfortunately my arrow is not working there, but the control, so the red line is the control. And then when they added a little bit, about 0.5%, there was some reduction. At 1%, they saw a further reduction. And at 2%, it just almost gone, almost completely eliminated the methane emissions at 2% of inclusion level. So this was, a really, really great start. But always in vivo, some additives work well in vitro, but not so much in real animals. So it has to be tested in real animals. So once this was published, we were interested in this, and so we contacted them and said, we would like to try this, and we would like to actually do an experiment with real animals. But first, we wanted to make sure that we get the same results. So they were doing it in a test tube. We had what we call a rumen simulator. So we did it on a rumen simulator. Let me see if I play this video. So you can see that the pistons going up and down. This is basically, we have 6 vessels, and 6 of them, they are supposed to be, each of them is supposed to be like a rumen in a cow. And what we do is then we take a rumen fluid. So from a real animal, we take a fluid and then put it in this flasks here. And then basically we maintain it at 39 degrees centigrade, the same temperature as a rumen. And then the rumen is always contracting, right? All the things, when they're digested, it moves on to the next chamber, and there's always contraction. So that's why you see these pistons moving up and down. And then you have the tubes that's coming out, and as things are fermenting, there will be gases released, and that gas, then we analyze that gas. And we found out, actually, yes, it did reduce quite a bit. So we were happy with that. So we then wanted to do an in vivo trial in real animals. And when we did it with dairy cattle the first time, we saw a 67% reduction. So this was a bit of surprise for me when my graduate student called me and said, this is what's happening. I didn't believe it. I mean, maybe the equipment is malfunction or something, because I've never seen anything like this. Before this, maybe there was a 30% reduction in another feed additive, but nothing like this. 67% is quite huge, and also is much less than in vitro. Usually, when it works in vitro, you kind of double it and do it in vivo. This is the other way around. At 2%, we saw in the lab reducing almost nothing, but here at 1%, it's already going down quite a bit. So let me see. So there was a lot of media interest in that, and stuff. And then we had a lot of follow-up questions. So the questions were then, well, okay, great, it works. We've seen, but it was a short trial. That was just a proof of concept kind of trial. So the question is, with the microbes in the gut, do they get used to it? And then there's no more. Like, if you use monensin or rumensin, you will reduce for some time, and then they get used to it, and then you don't reduce anymore. And the seaweed itself, with the active ingredient in seaweed, will be stable for a long period of time. And about the taste as well. I mean, if it reduces, but it changes the taste, it's not going to work. There was an additive made of garlic, for example, and in dairy cattle, and it reduces the emissions. But then you have to give them so much garlic when you taste the meat, the milk, it tastes garlicky. So I don't know. Maybe in the meat, it's fine, but in milk, I don't know. So we have to make sure that there's no effect that as well. And then obviously the productivity also is very important. It is going to reduce the productivity, then it's a no-go. So we did another trial. This time we did it with beef cattle. And so the first graph, the blue one is control, so no seaweed. And then you have the orange one is at a 0.25%. So we got a better quality seaweed. And so we give them just a 0.25% of there. So this is like 25 grams or an ounce or two. It's very, very small amount. And we saw quite a drastic reduction. And then we doubled that to 0.5%, again, maybe 2-3 ounces. And you see another dip as well. So we go up to 82% reduction in emissions. And the cows, they look healthy. We didn't see any kind of issue. In a similar trial that was done in Australia, they looked at 3 levels. So there's the control, there's a low level, the mid, and high. Their high is actually lower than our low. So the highest was 0.2% of the feed. So maybe one ounce or something like that that they used. And as you can see here, the animals actually had a better average daily weight gain. So they were doing better with the seaweed. So the feed efficiency was better, and obviously the cost for the farmer would be better as well. So you're saving on the feed, and you're getting the better weight. So obviously there's some interest in using this. So again, lots of media contacts there. So now the question is, where do we go with this? So we know seaweed can work, but the cultivation of this particular seaweed has been barrier. It's not easy to cultivate Asparagus ormis because nobody has done it to that level before. I mean, a lot of people they grow kelp and other type of seaweed in Korea, China, Indonesia, but Asparagus is a different type of seaweed. But now there is a lot of research that's going on in the lab to try to understand its life cycle. What conditions you need to create to get as much production as possible. So trying to scale up basically. So this has been happening in Hawaii, and what they're trying to do is basically have something like this where you grow it in those vessels, and then you take out and you dry it, and basically this is what it would look like at the end, and you just mix that with diet, and that will be it. So this is quite exciting prospect, but it still has a long way to go. Depending on investment, I would say 2 to 5 years is where we expect this to happen. But there are also other seaweeds that okay. There are also other seaweeds that have a lot of benefits. Different seaweeds contain different type of ingredients as well as different bioactives as well. So they contain different levels of protein or carbohydrate or lipid, which is essential parts, but more importantly, they have different bioactive compounds as well. They have different peptides or saponins or pigments and all that. And these are the ones that will help in reduction of methane. So here, I'm not expecting you to read all this, but the one that's put here, the Ascophyllum is the one that is quite common in this area. The Ascophyllum and I think the Laminaria, those two species are quite common around here. And it shows that in some cases in the lab, it actually showed a reduction in methane emissions. So people haven't done this in real animals, but it needs to be done to see how much it will affect. So the bromoform concentration of those two species that are widely available in these islands is the Ascophyllum and the Laminaria. They do have some bromoform concentration. The bromoform is basically the one that's giving Asparagopsis the advantage in reducing emissions. So if you look at the bottom one, that's Asparagopsis. That's between 43 to 1,256 nanograms per gram of fresh weight is the concentration of bromoforms. The higher the bromoform, the more it will reduce emissions. So maybe Laminaria may have some, because about close to 50 nanograms per gram. So there need to be more work on this, but this type of seaweed is quite abundant in Orkney. Another way to reduce is, tannins also have been shown to reduce methane emissions. So if you, those seaweeds that are found here, they do have some tannin content as well. So you would think that with the tannins, with a little bit of bromoform they have, they might be able to reduce emissions. And the reason I'm saying is that, if you do that, there are other plant bioactive compounds that we've tried. This one is based on garlic and citrus extracts. And we saw a reduction of about just over 20% reduction in emissions. So plant secondary compounds will help in reducing emissions. Just to give you kind of different perspective, these are the different additives, the more promising additives out there right now. So the seaweed, as you can see, is right at the top. And then fatty acid inclusion or lipid inclusion also would help, but it's limited. You can't give them more than 6% of the diet. Otherwise, you can have, for dairy cattle, you might have milk fever. For beef cattle, you have reduced digestion and also lower intake as well. So you're limited by how much you can include this. The other one is 3-NOP, which is a synthetic compound developed by DSM, and it has been approved in Brazil and Chile just 2 weeks ago, and maybe in Europe it will be approved as well. So that reduces in dairy cattle about 40%, and in beef cattle about 30% or so. So it's a good prospect as well. So let me see. So just then the impact of all of this is then, we've seen average net reduction for seaweed about 32%. For this 3-NOP is 11 or 12%, and then nitrate is another additive that you can use, but with nitrate it's a bit tricky, because if they eat a little bit more than they should, they will die because it's toxic. If nitrate converts into nitrite in the body, and nitrite can be taken up in the blood and competes with iron hemoglobin, so there is a toxicity aspect to it. So it's a bit dangerous to, if you give them slowly, adapt them slowly, it's okay. But in a commercial setting, you can't guarantee that. And but because of the toxicity, I don't think anybody can use it right now. So we did some calculations in California, what it means. If everybody uses seaweed, we can reduce 6 billion carbon dioxide equivalent, and with 3-NOP about 2 billion. And with nitrate, about 1 billion carbon dioxide equivalent. So it's quite a big effect if you're able to do this. So to end the slot now, we have several solutions to help us reduce enteric methane emissions from livestock. Unfortunately, up to now, they are not on the market. Seaweed is not on the market, 3-NOP not on the market, Mutrol with citrus is not on the market. So you can't buy something off the shelf right now, give it to animals and say reduce it. So this needs to be changed. It's starting. So the DSM product in Chile and Brazil is starting, but regulation is stopping us from going forward, but hopefully this will be solved in the near future. And in terms of efficacy, nothing compares with seaweed. It's just the most effective we have. You know, if you can get a fresh seaweed, Asparagus, you can actually reduce it by 98%. You know, in Australia, they have seen 98% reduction. So yeah, there's a lot of potential there. And then we can develop a protocol, which we are doing right now, that anybody in the world can use to calculate how much carbon you're reducing by using something like that. Then you can sell that carbon and get farmers can get credit for that reduction in carbon. Okay, I think that's it.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
No?
I'm going to be happy to just try.
Yeah.
And here,
So if you exit, just plug this one in and see if that works any better. But I'll need to tell Zoom you're using this one. Hi, yeah, we're just trying a different microphone. So this microphone.
One, two, three.
Does
Does that work better? Can people hear me?
Put in chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, Johnny's nodding.
Okay. All right. Then I'll use this. All right. Thank you.
Okay. So have we got any? I was going to do.
Yeah.
Right. I'll. Yeah. So I'm just going to do a little bit about from an OREF point of view, if that's okay with everybody. Just give us a second. See if this will share. Okay. I'm just okay. Give us a second. Right, hello everybody. So I thought I'd just do a couple of slides really about why OREF was interested in this in the first place. So we'll just see if this works. Which I'm not seeing, the screen's not moving on.
Right down the. Oh.
Right, time, and you're going for a jolly or?
Give us a second, everybody.
It's yours, isn't it?
Yep. It's on the screen behind you.
Where is it?
Okay, so just wanted to talk very briefly about why OREF was interested in this in the first place. OREF's aims and objectives of the Renewable Energy Forum is really driven very much by renewable energy. So it's about to encourage the preferential use of it, to find the best or debate the best technical and sustainable options for increasing the amount of renewable energy, and also facilitate research and development in renewable energy and efficiency. And then finally, disseminating information on renewables. And the point is, there's no mention of kelp in there anywhere at the moment. And so it was really felt that as a result of some discussions that had gone on, there was a possibility that there could be some coincidence here. The reason we were really interested was that there are the three potential links. If, and it's this if question we hopefully answer something about tonight, if kelp actually does reduce climate emissions, then it's going in very much the same direction as renewables. So it's in the same spirit as, even if it's not necessarily directly applicable. But I do know that there's an awful lot of work that's gone on with farmers over time about putting renewables on their farms. So we feel there's a sort of a momentum in that direction, and there's been a little bit of a gap in this sort of space, which is why we're really pleased to hear the potential of what could happen with seaweed. If there is an opportunity to use seaweed in some form, can it be made with renewables? In other words, we've got energy here. We know we can get more energy out of the air and the water around us. Is there more that we could do? And we also know the challenges we've got with getting the energy away. So can we do something with it locally? And could we do the processing of materials? And then finally, one idea was about, if we know we're going to have a local waste heat from a variety of things, and would that be usable? Say, I know on Edie, for example, we've got hydrogen production, which is going to have a significant quantity of waste heat from it. So would that be of use? And so that's really what sort of caught our interest as a whole. And there has been a history of using seaweeds in Orkney in various ways. So the tangles that were picked up on the beaches have been used as a fertilizer and a soil conditioner, and also a chemical feedstock in the past. And they've been sporadically used. But the point is that there was some commercial harvesting done a little while ago up around Westray, I think, in the recent past. But that was halted really because it was effectively clear felling some seaweeds as opposed to cultivating them. And the point is, there's no history really of kelp or seaweed cultivation, only beach or wild harvesting. But nowadays there are significant changes going on. I know, for example, there's work going on Lambholm at the moment, where a lot of work with growing algae for fish feeding, for oysters and various things. You know, there's a lot of work where we're starting to see natural processes brought into the lab, and with the introduction of energy, you do a certain amount of processing. So is there an opportunity here, which is one of the things that was of interest. And also looking around at this, I mentioned that the clear felling stuff of seaweed was stopped a little while ago, but the Marine Scotland have actually looked at the possibilities about seaweed cultivation, and in their report they produced quite recently, say the Scottish Government is supportive of small medium farm seaweed cultivation. So government is starting to see this as a potential thing. It's seen as a potential activity that would seem to get some sort of support. And then the final point is, as I said, you know, it is done elsewhere. And I just quickly did a Google search on some images and found that the Faroes are doing it, Flanders are doing it, France is doing it. I couldn't find somewhere in Ireland with an F in it, but they're also doing it. And the point is, you know, would Orkney be suitable for kelp or seaweed cultivation? And that was what drew these things really together. It was the fact that there may well be something, if there's a use for it, can we help supply that need? And that was what drove tonight. So obviously there's a potential for there to be some coincidence, but what I'd like to do now is have a bit of an open discussion about what we see, because what I've heard this evening is very much that there are particular seaweeds which are going to be better than others. It's not necessarily kelp, it's about growing particular seaweeds that will have the greatest benefit, and trying to better understand what we think locally in terms of the energy that we have got, and are there ways of using it, and similarly the potential need that we can fulfill in helping farming and producing some sort of feedstock. And that's the point of coincidence that I wanted to touch on. So if people are okay with that, I'm going to stop sharing now. If I can stop sharing, that is, Mark. Oh, there we go. There we go. Stop sharing. There we go. Really happy to take any questions that anybody may have got. And Ermias, if you're okay to answer, and we'll probably do this as a bit of a double act, and we'll see how we go from here. So, any questions from anybody? And I'm just trying to work out. I can't decide if Tony is waving at the camera or just trying to unmute himself. So there you go.
Kick off.
Yeah, Cliff, go ahead.
What's the dry matter of the seaweed to begin with? And when you dry it down, how much energy does it take to dry down a ton of seaweed?
I'm just going to repeat that back for people on there. So basically, it's how much dry matter is there in a ton of seaweed, and how much energy does it take to dry down that seaweed to get something useful? Is that right, Cliff?
Yeah, and if you were talking about 1% in the feed, a 500 kilo animal would eat 10 kilos of dry matter, and that would be 100 grams.
So you're saying that a half-ton animal would have about how many grams? 10 grams a day?
They would eat 10 kilos of dry matter of feed.
Yep.
And 1% of that would be 100 grams.
So a half-ton animal will need about 100 grams of additive a day.
1%.
Yeah, that sort of order. So I'll give you the mic. You can.
Yeah, thank you. So for the first question, yes, I mean the water content of seaweeds is quite high. So you're gonna need quite a lot of seaweed to be able to get into the dried, to get the dry matter. I can't tell you exactly what the ratio is, but there's a lot of water in that, so that there's going to be a lot more fresh seaweed that you need to dry it down. And the best way to keep the bioactives is actually to freeze dry it. So it's going to take energy. So if there is a source of energy that can be used to dry this, there's some work that needs to be done. Can we do it in a freeze dry, or can we do it in a different way and with heat dry? But so far, what we know is that the bioactives do really well in freeze dry. We haven't tested them. What happens when you dry them with heat or just on this just by sunlight? We don't know that. So that kind of work needs to be done, and then in what condition you need to keep them so that you don't lose this bioactives. Because the reason that you're getting this reduction is because of this bioactives, the organic compounds, and we have to make sure that they are not released during this drying process, because then it will defeat the purpose of doing that. So there's more work that need to be done. In terms of the amount they're eating, we no longer do 1%. So we did 1% because we use a different species that has lower bromoform concentration. In the beef cattle, we only went to 0.5%. We didn't do 1%. So if they are eating 10 kilos, then the 0.5% will be 50 grams of seaweed. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay, so sorry. Okay. Any other questions in the room?
Where does asparagus grow naturally? What kind of temperate does it need to grow in the sea? It's like it's a warm water.
Yeah. So, what kind of conditions does asparagus do well under? And it's warm waters, but it's relative. Asparagus armata is a different species of the same genus, and that one grows in colder waters. For example, in Ireland, there is a company in Ireland that is trying to commercialize this right now. So a related species can do that, but they don't have as much bromo from the active ingredients, so it's probably half as effective. But then half of 98% is still pretty good. But yeah, so there are some cold waters asparagus that can be grown, but their effectiveness is lower than taxiformis. So the best one would be taxiformis in a warm water, but cold water ones, particularly in the Irish conditions, it works really well. Armata grows very well in Ireland, and they're trying to commercialize that. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions in the room? If not, we're going to see if there's anything on the.
There's nothing in the chat yet.
No, nobody wants to chat. I don't know. Is it? So I can't. Ian, your hand up. Oh yeah, go Ian. Sorry.
Yeah, can I just ask? So obviously, as Neil mentioned, in Orkney we have a huge amount of kelp. We've got the biggest kelp forests close to Orkney in the whole of Scotland. And I appreciate that it's maybe not got quite so much of the active ingredient, but do you think if that was harvested sustainably, that could be the solution or a partial solution?
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the things is it's not just about the methane, but also using a byproduct or an ingredient that is grown sustainably. And the good thing with seaweed is, you don't need fresh water, you don't need land, and you don't need fertilizers. And you're also drawing carbon dioxide, because when you're growing in a seawater, you are actually maintaining the ocean even in a better condition, because any affluence of nitrogen and phosphorus or something like that will be captured, and carbon dioxide will be captured as well. So that would help in terms of the acidity. It's definitely better for the environment. And then if you replace some crops with the seaweed, then you obviously are improving the overall sustainability and the overall carbon footprint of the operation as well. So it's not just about the methane, but if you can use seaweed as an ingredient, it's not just the small amount that we're talking about, but significant amount, like 5%, 10% of the feed. If it can be replaced by seaweed, then I think you would really have an impact on the carbon footprint of the operation.
Thank you.
I've got a question for you, Ian, as well. I'm just wondering, given the work that Akaterra has done over the years on a variety of things, did you have any comments about the usability of local waters for things like aquaculture? Because I know, given the storminess we get here, I imagine that might be a challenge. Is it any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, we have actually looked at commercial kelp production for a project a few years ago. So, and it was linked to the old herring factory actually in Stumness that's sitting idle. So there are opportunities there to be able to develop something like this. And a lot of the kelp harvest nowadays are done quite sustainably. There's different methodologies. Some of it, as you said in your introduction in the past, was blanket cutting, which happened a lot in Norway and other places, but that's improved a lot over the years. And as you see from the beaches around Orkney, it's quite a waste product that wouldn't, you could even pick quite a lot of it from there, but it could still be cleverly harvested, I think, with a bit of thought and a bit of work.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Okay, any other questions for anybody around the piece? Mel from Edie, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to mention that we're sitting here with a turbine that's heavily curtailed and the spare energy if anybody wanted to try something like that. There's numerous farmers here who have been looking into this, and we would certainly welcome a discussion with both of you as soon as we could, if we possibly.
Thanks, Mel. Okay, we're going to have a chat about this afterwards and see if there is anything we can cook up. But it's we appreciate the interest that's there, because as people probably know, there is a huge potential for more energy to be harvested, and it's something of a crime that we've got turbines that are standing around which are having to be turned off when there's insufficient demand. So anything we can do to boost that demand would seem to be a sensible thing to do, because we've got standing plant good to go. So it'd be good to see anything.
That'll be really good. We've actually done a feasibility study into it already, so we'll share that with you and see where we can go with that.
Thanks, Mel. That'd be really useful. Okay, we'll do that. Tony, I see you're not on mute. Did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I just a question. I thought, with all the spare energy, like curtailed turbines, if you had seaweed growing lagoons that were warmed with this heat, then you grow the right kind of warm water seaweed. Would that be an expensive way about it? But whether it would be worth it or not, I don't know. But it's just a thought I had.
Yeah, I don't know if Ermias, have you got any thoughts about the practicalities of growing seaweed in lagoons, or what I'm hearing is there are some particular weeds which seem to work better in the colder water weeds, which seem to give the better performance. The warm ones giving the better performance. Okay, so so that could be a thing. I've got no feeling about the density of how much you can get out of a given volume of lagoon type process, but that could be quite interesting.
Yeah, I think, if you find out exactly what kind of temperature we're looking for, and we have it in a aquaculture setting, then I think it might be possible to do that. I mean, right now there's a lot of work that's been done in the lab trying to understand what's the best condition to give them. So if we know that the temperature is about 16 to 18 is okay, and then we can warm up those. We can get enough energy to warm that up to that level and provide all the nutrients that's necessary. Then, yeah, I think it definitely can be doable. But at the moment, the research is not there to tell us what is really the best conditions for Asparagopsis. But that's coming. That's coming.
Okay. So watch this space. Adele, do you want to take on? Adele, are you there? You're off mute, but we're not hearing you. You're now on mute.
Sorry, I just switched mics in the background.
Yeah. Can just about hear you, Adele, so if you want to bellow at the screen. Not hearing you, sorry, Adele.
How about this one? Low-tech mic.
That's
yeah,
better.
Good. Yeah, the paper that you found on the Orcadian sheep, was that the only one that you came across?
Yeah. So just looking at the papers that was published, there was another one, but it wasn't really specific to this. But that's the sort of the more known reference to what's happening in the north of the islands.
Yeah, it seems interesting. There might be a really good research opportunity, given that we have a kind of native sheep population that consumes seaweed and also one that doesn't. So there might just be quite an easy research piece maybe to pick up there. It was really interesting to see that paper.
Yeah.
Thanks, Adele. Okay. Any other? Tony, I see you're off mute again.
Oh, not on purpose.
So there's some stuff in chat. So Susan saying there's a seaweed farm being set up off the North Yorkshire coast. And also, could you say something about any other nutritional benefits of seaweed for cattle or sheep? Any thoughts?
Yeah. So the seaweeds are quite diverse in terms of concentration of carbohydrates or lipids or protein. So you can see a lot of spectrum, and even in protein, for example, you can see those who have maybe 1% protein up to 30% protein. So it's a matter of trying to find the right ones to try to balance on what is needed. In areas where there is no shortage of protein sources and you needed more for lipids or for micronutrients, then I think that would be a good idea. But in general, the micronutrient and mineral content of seaweed is much higher than land-based plants. So it can be used for that, to add to whatever diet is having. The micronutrient aspect of seaweed is important. I think almost all the species of seaweed will have some of the micronutrients. In some cases, it could be a lot. For example, with Asparagopsis, the downside is it has a lot of iodine and bromine. So it just depends on the species. But it's been used as an ingredient for nutrition. So nothing to do with methane, but just for nutrition. There are a number of seaweed that can be used, but it depends on specific areas on what particular nutrient is missing, so that seaweed can add to that particular diet.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, for grazing cattle, like obviously house cattle, you can feed this into their diets, but do you think there's a way that it could be suspended in like a mineral lick, like we put lick buckets out so they can get a small dose every day for grazing cattle? Is that a possibility, or do you need any ways?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you deal with this for grazing animals, basically? yeah, so that is still a challenge. Right now, the focus is, can we get this commercialized, you know? But that's the next phase, because most animals are actually grazing, and they're on grazing, and so the biggest benefit you can get is if you can get out to grazing animals, you would really increase the impact that you will have. And so the idea is either to do something like you were mentioning as a mineral block, so that the animals can you know, have a lick or something, or it could be a slow release form, so that the animals can eat it, and then maybe it's slowly released. So maybe for a few months, you don't have to do anything. Just, you know, it will be slowly released and be able to do that way. So yeah, for those minimally handled animals, it might be difficult, but if you handle them on a more regular basis, then it becomes the more they are handled, the easier it is, basically.
A bolus would be ideal.
Yeah.
We have 6 month bolus now for nutrients and for micronutrients. But the question as well, like, is there a big difference between concentrates, high concentrate diets for cattle and like grass? Is there much difference in methane production?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good question. So the question is there a difference in effectiveness of reducing methane with high forage and or low forage kind of diets? And yes, there is. The last experiment we did with beef cattle, we tried to answer that exact question. So we start giving them when they are on high forage, so like a starter diet, and then we have a transition diet. So we kind of have more concentrate, and then we have a finisher diet. And what we've seen is that it's much more effective in finisher diet than it is on the starter diet. But I mean, it's all relative. So on a starter diet, it's about 60%. On the finisher diet, it's about 80% reduction. So that's kind of theoretically is expected. An inhibitor would do well when there is less amount of hydrogen going around. But with forage, with high forage, you can have more hydrogen. So it's not enough to be able to reduce the microbes fast enough to have that achievement, because there's so much more hydrogen going on. With concentrates, I mean, the figure that I showed you, even without seaweed, you will see that there's a dip when there is a concentrate. The emissions go down, and the reason they go down is because then when you give them highly digestible feed, the amount of methane is already lower, so it's much more effective than to get rid of the rest of the methane. While in the high forage, you will have more methane, so yeah, they have to work harder to try to stop the microbes from forming methane. Right.
I was just wondering a point as well, because I think Orkney's quite well placed, I would have thought, with agriculture because of the beast being in the byres for 6 months of the year. So we've effectively got a sort of half and half process where you've got that high intervention. So you can, at least if you cut 50% of the problem down for half the year, well, that's still better than poking the eye with a sharp stick. You know, you're going the right way in this. So it does feel as though there's something.
Near 7 months.
Near 7 months. Okay, so more than half the year. So you got access. So that's yes, yeah, not those good years. Okay, and there's a point that Erland's made about lick buckets have been available, but he found that sheep didn't take them at grass. So that was a piece of information, and also study done showing reduction in liver fluke disease with cattle fed on seaweed. So one of the other advantages. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there was also some studies that show that there's a less amount of pathogenic E. coli shedding when you're using seaweed. So, and for parasites as well, it reduces the parasite load for sheep and cattle. But I think this was done mostly in sheep. So there's more benefits than just being an ingredient or reducing methane.
Getting better and better, isn't it? Okay. Any other questions that anybody's got? If not, then going once, going twice. There you go. So, okay, for nothing else on the chat. So, Adele, did you want to try and say anything over the joys of the internet as the climate change officer for the council, or not on behalf of the council, but as somebody in the middle of this?
Yeah, and OREF board member, etc. As well. But yeah, I just was kindly invited and also would wish to introduce myself as the climate officer. It was really great to hear a widening out of some of the topics around food consumption and climate change, and it can be a particularly difficult topic openly to discuss, you know, in a heritage society like ours that has farming right at the top of the economic chain, but also our kind of cultural and social heritage as well. So it was really good to see, you know, some of the data coming out around nutrition and bringing it back towards food production, which is kind of in line, I think, with the Scottish Government climate policies as well. And it's just to say that I'm extending myself out. I've spoken to the NFU so far, but if anybody would like to get in touch with me and just introduce yourself or whatever, you can catch me. I'll put my email address in the chat. But it's just such an important topic for Orkney, not just the economy, but I think we stand a really good chance to kind of position ourselves as a food producing area, which is a kind of a different ethos for some as well. So it's just really good to be talking about farming in the climate context as well. So yeah, just to show you my face and extend out my contact details. And it's been fascinating to see some of the data, but really encouraging to kind of explore some of the more detailed issues around that food production and farming with climate change. And that's it.
Thanks, Adele. Okay, so it really just down to me to sort of say, you know, thank you so much indeed for coming all this way up from soggy Edinburgh or wherever it was to come up to see us, and really do appreciate it. As I was saying earlier today, Orkney's a great place for taking on new ideas and assimilating thoughts. So if at any stage you think of something that you think we could help with in any way, in any space, I think people here are genuinely interested in trying to find a way to make a real difference. So we appreciate the work you are doing. Thanks, Rushdie, for coming up to see us. Thanks to everybody for coming online tonight. We plan to stream this in due course. And so I'll say thank you. Did you want to close up?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, you know, so thank you. Thank you for the invitation. You know, I had a wonderful day, and thank you to Tony for showing me around. You know, the wonderful stuff that's happening, and I hope I can come back at some point.
Cheers. Right. Thanks, everybody. Right. Good night, everybody. Bye.